Oh, it's actually on the wrong slide. It starts from the end.
Hey, Alex.
Boom. Cool. So it was November 2015. I was in the Intercom office in the meeting with a bunch of other people, and we were chatting about this emergent pattern, bots. And there's nothing really new about bots. Bots have really been around for quite a while. We have been talking about them, and they've been occupying our minds since like ancient Greece and China, like Louis XIV's France and Victorian Britain. And people were thinking and talking about this concept of automatons. It's basically like this dolls, mechanical dolls that were able to do some specific predefined actions. Like, for example, you could talk to them, you could ask them a question, and they would write it to you. The trick was that you could only ask like a very specific question, because the answer they could write, it was really predefined already. And but like it worked, and it was really interesting and really fascinating. The thing is that after that, so we explored it, the idea of bots in the popular culture, and we explored it in sci-fi. We probably all remember main characters of 2001 Space Odyssey, who were talking via voice effortlessly to this HAL 9000 evil bot. And we remember the stuff from gaming, when you're talking to like NPC and you choose like a specific response so that you can steer the dialogue into a specific area. And like today, we basically like today's hype. It's really been around for a long time, and there's pretty much nothing new about bots. There was also nothing new about those conversations that we had in Intercom. We've been talking about bots for ages. Intercom overall is this messaging platform that helps businesses to communicate with their customers. And you can think of it as having like this two parts. So like one is Intercom Messenger, and another one is Intercom Platform. And the Messenger, it basically like lives on other people's websites. It's where you kind of go and like talk, where your customers actually like write you messages, or like through which you send messages to your customers. And the Intercom Platform is basically this central repository of all your customer data, and it's kind of focused around this like specific workflows and specific products for customer support, for sales, and for marketing teams. And when you are in this area of like customer and business communication, you end up thinking naturally about automation and about bots. And so, like, there are, for example, like we were thinking about things like if the visitor comes to your website, what if we just like would automatically try to understand and like qualify if this lead is like a good or not good, if it's worse for teammates to actually spend time talking to them, or alternatively, if a user asks this recurring, really simple question that has been answered for a really long time, can we just like automatically provide an answer to it, rather than rely on teammates and allow teammates to actually like respond with this, to reply to more hardcore and more unique conversations. And so like all of those conversations that we had, they pretty much ended up with some version of like, well, imagine this like awesome future where we would have bots, and the bots would be able to do like all of this magic and all of this shit. And what was new about that conversation, though, was the fact that we actually made a decision to start exploring bots and like start actually like delivering on all those conversations and all of those ideas. And just like to understand like November of 2015, it was basically the time when really there were just a few actual working bot examples out there. It was like 6 months before Facebook launched its bot developer platform. And basically, pretty much, there were no set patterns, no set design principles. Like, we did not really know what we were doing, and there were no way for us to like see and understand like whether or not we're doing the right thing or not. We basically were presented kind of with this blank page, and we need to explore and iterate and like understand and test and see whether or not this thing actually worked and this thing made sense. And what basically we've done, we had like a lot of questions. Like, we basically were thinking like, should the bot have a name? And like, if yes, like what should it be? Like, we were thinking what should be the tone of voice of this bot? Should like we somehow distinguish the bot's replies, like the chat bubbles that bot sends and human sends? Should the bot have an avatar? And should the interaction be based on the understanding of like NLP, like natural language processing, basically like us understanding what the person is saying automatically, or should we involve a human? So those were like just a fraction of the questions that we had, and none of those questions really had an answer. So what we decided to do was to focus on just one specific problem and try to solve this problem with using the bot as a pattern. And for us, like, we picked up this issue of missed connections. And the thing is about missed connections, basically like when a visitor comes to your website and they say something like, hey, I have a question, and the team may not be around at that time. So what would happen would basically, the team would come back later, reply, and at that time, a visitor can already be gone and never to come back. And so it's like frustrating for a visitor because they don't really get an answer. And it's frustrating for a teammate because you basically just spent like time replying to a customer who would never see the response, and you have no way to contact those users. And so what we decided to do was basically like try to ask a question about like, well, can you provide your contact details? And basically just like roll on from there. And so the things that we have thought about, like just like looking at it retrospectively, it was crazy how many things we've got wrong. Like, everything that seemed cool actually turned out to be disastrous, and like really boring stuff turned out to be really good and really effective. And like, my main focus for most of last year was actually like working on different interactions inside Intercom Messenger between bots and humans. And basically this talk is all about the lessons learned. So the first lesson was actually like knowing what you want. And it's like really easy to say like, hey, we need to start with why, and start with understanding the reason why you're doing something. And to tell the truth, like at the time that we started working on the project, we really did not. Like the way we build things, the way we decide to put stuff into roadmap, it's basically like half of the stuff is things that we know that people need, like basically stuff that our customers ask us, stuff that we know, like some deficiencies in the product, etc. And the other half is kind of stuff that we believe in. It's kind of like shit that we want to invent and explore, and we think this is the future, and this is like exciting to see and understand if it will stick and it will actually work out. And bots were really like the latter. They were really this category of exploration and understanding and seeing like, well, we believe that bots are the future and conversational UI can be the future. So let's see how and explore how it will work. And when you're making like a bet like that, it's really easy to forget the why you are basically doing something, and just focus on the cool shit. So when we started working on it, I basically like started with this like implementing this ideas that we had and like this really future-oriented stuff. So I started with like this cool and human-like approach where you would chat with a bot the same way you would chat with a human. And let's say you just ask a question and the bot jumps in and says that, hey, the team is not around right now, can I get your email? And you'd say, yeah, sure, here's my email. You'd type it and the bot would say, yeah, all good. Or like you'd say, no, not really, I don't want to, and it will say like no problems. Or you may say, well, I'd rather like leave my phone number, and the bot would respond, sure, like no problems. What's your phone number? And in those scenarios when we would not be able to understand what you were, what your message was about, we would just basically create this, respond with like, hey, I'm a dumb bot. I don't know the answer to your question, and a human will be soon, and they will reply to you. The thing is that it was basically just like happy path and like this really future-like, nice, awesome stuff. But the problem was that it was like complete shit. We basically like did not get like that many actual contact details from people. People were doing a shitload of stuff. They were playing around with the bot. Like some were basically like sending like multiple messages and not really paying attention to the bot's interactions. Some were just like not really understanding whether they were communicating with a human or a bot, and some were just like basically like stopping doing whatever they were doing and like trying to play with the bot and understand like how it can break. And this is actually the pattern that we've noticed like a lot. And so the thing was like the designs that we had was the pattern that we chose was doing so many things, but it was not doing the very fucking job that we actually like created it for. It was not collecting emails. And that was a really, really good wake-up call, because I think that the reason basically why it happened was that we were too focused on this like, hey, let's invent the future and let's like do this like really cool thing, rather than actually like thinking about the reason why we were doing it. And the reason was that we were solving this really specific, concrete problem, but we were not just like paying attention to it. And the users, they did not really care about this like cool interaction pattern. They really wanted just like a solution to their problem. And so staying focused on the goal would really, really help us to avoid those distractions. And so the next thing that we've done, we basically like did after several iterations, we stumbled on this approach where we took the interaction out of the chat itself, and we put everything into this card that basically was the bot was basically like presenting a card, and you could type your email, your phone number. We could easily validate it. You could just like ignore it if you would not want to leave your contact details. You could keep typing and come back to it later. And the thing is that we really, really, like by doing that, by focusing on the goal and focusing on the reason why we are doing it, on solving actually the problem, we were able to really focus on something and like create something that was not what we initially expected it would be. And so like basically the bot in our final design became a delivery mechanism rather than like this full conversational part. And that actually helped us to improve the collection rate twofold. So like really staying focused on the goal like helped us to create the design that was really working and basically really good. That does not only work for us. Like I think there are like really good examples out there. Like for example, if you look at Poncho. Poncho is this Facebook Messenger bot, which kind of tells you about the weather. And like on the first glance, it kind of seems like, well, that's a good idea. But then when you think about the interaction pattern, where you need to choose like what is the place that you are in right now, you basically can get into this like really weird a jailbot scenario where it would not just understand like what is your location. So maybe like in this scenario, like a much better version of the interaction pattern, if you started like with the goal, would be like having even the cart or like some selection from the predefined options, because they don't have all the options, all the cities. At the same time, I think that really good example is Slack with their onboarding that kind of like just onboards you in the conversational UI by chatting to the bot by introducing the product. And that's because the goal was kind of made the cornerstone while building the interaction. So just like the lesson is basically that like starting with why, and more importantly, staying focused on why, was really, really critical for us to create the pattern that actually worked. And then another thing is basically like knowing what your limits are. And this one is really interesting because when we started testing the first version, it was like really, it was not surprising that it did not work. The reason was that when you are talking about all those like different variations and like completely unconstrained input, there are just like so many ways that the conversation can go wrong. Like the email may not be recognized to the, even if we focus just on recognizing email, there could be like 2 emails sent, there could be like an email with a typo, there could be like so many ways that the conversation can go wrong. And the problem basically like was that like after we like started this with this first version and before we actually came to this conclusion with the input card, we actually had the different versions that we experimented also. We basically took the, we basically kept the experience that we had with like this chat-like experience, but we switched the input area into like more like constrained thing, so that when the bot basically asked you to, hey, would you like to send me, to leave me your email, it would switch into like this email field plus like a button like not now. But the problem was that people did not really like it, and it really was broke because either they did not notice the switch in the input area, or they were stressed out because of the cognitive load, because of the need to click the no, and inability to come back to the interaction. So it just like did not work. And the problem was that like until we actually like understood the lessons from here and decided to focus specifically on like solving the problem and limiting the interaction to make sure that the interaction actually works, we were not able to come to the solution that was actually working. And the approach we with the input card, it actually was like super limiting. It was bound to just like the card. Whatever you wrote in the chat, it was like basically like the bot was ignoring it. And so that thing, by being so limited, actually like worked really well. And that works like for other apps. I think there are 2 really good examples. One is Quartz, and Quartz is this news app that basically sends you like this news snippet, and you can have like 2 options. You can either click, hey, show me more, and it will basically send you several more snippets about that specific piece of news, or you can skip it. And another one is Lifeline. And Lifeline is a game. It's a game that is built completely like around the conversational pattern. You're basically chatting to an astronaut who is stranded on like this faraway planet, and you're trying to help him to get back home, and you're doing that by just like basically choosing specific answers and specific like pieces of advice that you're giving that person. And both of those products, they are really opinionated about the types of actions that you can take, and by being like by actually constraining the options that you have, they're able to ensure that you'll have like really good experience. And at the same time, look at like this chatbot for 1-800-Flowers, and that's basically like a bot that lets you order flowers, and this is fucking ugly, and this is wrong, and this is bad. Like basically, like by providing this fully unconstrained way of communication and not having fail-safes. Like basically, if there are cases when you would need to provide an unconstrained way to input the data, but at least you need to focus on the on understanding how things can go wrong, because things will go wrong. And so, like for example, like in this scenario, like a way better approach would be if they don't understand what the user said after a couple of times, the bot should just like quit, like like basically it should just like say something intelligent and just like quit, and maybe like leave it for a human to tackle. But basically the constraints, they really help you to ensure that the experience that the user will have with your bot, it would actually be pleasant. And the constraints and limits, they are not for the scenarios when things are like good. They are for the scenarios when things are really bad and things are broken and things are going wrong. The third lesson was all about knowing what you say. And to tell the truth, when I started working on the bots interactions, I knew that language would be really important, but I really did not anticipate how much important it will be. Basically, like language is probably the most critical part of all the interactions that we had. We basically like were writing way more than we were designing, and the question that kind of started it all was, should the bot have a personality? And it's a really simple question. At least I thought so, because like after playing with like even the Slack bot, which is witty and interesting and fun, you kind of want to make your chatbot similar. Like you want it to be interesting, engaging, and real. But the problem was that, like even like think of the movie, like any movie which has a bot. Like think of Wall-E and Eve and their love story. They're so like you fall in love with them. Like the bot from Her, it was basically like just tremendous how human-like she was. Even the BB-8, like the bot that can't speak, it actually like we can understand it like easily. And so I basically wanted to do the same thing with the bot that we were building, to make it warm and welcoming and cool, but people hated it. People just like fucking hated it. And the reason was that by introducing, like it was a really simple and stupid bot. Like this, initially what we had was like really just like this one single interaction where it was just like trying to collect emails. And by giving it kind of personality, people were expecting that it's actually way more. They were expecting that it's something that is smart and intelligent and they can like just talk to it like in the movies. But it could not. And so they, like, as soon as they realized that, they felt really cheated and misled, and they were really frustrated about the whole interaction. So we basically just like got rid of all of the personality. We made the language really functional, and just that one change, without anything else, without any UI changes, without anything else, that made like all the difference. I think the good example is the app called Hooked. And Hooked is, it's like self-described, like a fiction for Snapchat generation. What they're basically doing, they're writing actual fiction that is presented in this like small bites. And by having this really intentional approach about writing, they are able to focus on each of the snippets to be like really as engaging as possible and as interesting as possible. And that works really, really well. Another one is Boss Uncle. And Boss Uncle is this really little bot that tells you about the next boss in Singapore. But the thing is that it does it in such a witty and awesome and interesting way that it's just like, it feels like an art. But at the same time, when you are not focused on language properly, things break. And language should not only be understandable and correct, it should also make sense. Like, messages should connect together. And so there are basically like three main things that I've learned through like all of this process. It's basically focusing on the goal, it's understanding the limits, and it's really paying a lot of attention to language. There is this old story about a grandmaster, chess grandmaster who appeared in late 18th century. He was called the Turk, and the Turk was he appeared from nowhere. He went through this tour of different European and American cities, and he played chess with anyone who wanted, including like Napoleon Bonaparte and Benjamin Franklin, and he beat them all. And the thing is about the Turk, he was actually just like an automaton. He was this mechanical doll that was able to understand the interaction, like the chess game, and play and win. He was able to, like, the craziest thing is that like it's the late 18th century when all the automatons were pretty much like a glorified mechanical clock. But this one, it could actually like interact, it could win, it could understand like change in game, it could improve like magic. And well, it kind of was magic because it was revealed years later that actually like that was a really elaborate hoax, and the automaton was actually operated by a human, and that human, who stays anonymous to this time, was basically this like really unknown grandmaster. And the thing that when you are thinking about bots right now, it actually feels like they are pretty much, despite all the hundreds of years of technological progress, really similar to those automatons. So the same way as automatons kind of could not really handle conversations that were beyond their scope, beyond the things that they were programmed to do, chatbots right now can't really handle complex stuff. They are really good for specific, really simple jobs, but they can't do something more, something bigger. And in scenarios when you are experiencing the really good example of interaction in a conversational UI, what actually happens, like you usually just like have a conversation like with the Turk, you have a conversation with the human operator on the other end. But it may not stay the same forever. Like changes are coming, and machine learning is improving, and things are getting better, and the complexity is increasing. So it really is possible that in a number of years we would have a bot that would be really smart and really understanding and really genuine and could really solve your problems in all those interesting and imaginable ways. But it still feels like, at least from where we stand today, that all those bots, even with all those awesome stuff that they could do, would still be rather limited in their jobs, just because there's so much you can do when you are using only like a keyboard or a voice. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and let's see your questions. The first one, isn't Siri more advanced technology with a better future since it's easier to talk than type?
It's a really good question. I actually think that voice is a way better medium for communication with a bot than a chatbot is. Just for the reason that, well, especially like things like Siri or Amazon Echo, things that are kind of listening to you in the background and just like responding to this specific keyword. Just because it's really easier and faster, like you mentioned, to communicate the intent than it is by typing. The problem still is, as with any other chatbot, that it's really hard to do something complex with them. Like when you are bound to just like talking to a bot, you can check your email, you can like check some stats, you can know, you can ask about the weather. Like to tell the truth, I really can hardly remember the last time that I checked the weather by opening the app, actually. Like what I usually do is like, I'm just like saying like, hey Siri, what's the weather in Bratislava? And that's it. But the thing is that basically despite being more interesting, voice rather than text, it's still bound to the same limitations.
The next one, pros and cons. Oh, okay, let's just... Do you know that... Any more changes? Pros and cons of out-of-the-box... Oh, again. Let's stick with this one, please. I will stick with it, sorry for changes. Pros and cons of out-of-the-box versus tailor-made bot solutions regarding costs, deployment, security, customization options.
I think, yeah, it's a good one. I think to tell the truth that like the bots are actually like really good example of how you can test stuff out by putting not too many resources into actually building like your own product. I would really encourage like pretty much most of the companies to focus on building like a chatbot for Slack before they are building like a product, like a proper product, because it will actually like enable you to get the validation of your idea. It would enable you to get first customers. It would enable you to actually like start building out like something really quickly, rather than like focusing on building something like more complex. And when you are like focused on another platform, it also helps that platform kind of helps you to market this thing. You basically get the immediate access to like way more customers than you would have on your own. And so I think that it's really useful to just like start by actually designing and building a bot using like this pre-built tools, rather than like trying to focus on building your own thing.
We have a patriotic question. Did you know that the Turk was built in Bratislava by local engineer Kempelen?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I actually did not know that, because at least from the research that I've done, the Kempelen was named as a Hungarian, but I knew it was a trap. I knew it was a trap. But yeah, that's fun.
So now you do know, yeah. Just
now I do.
Remember.
Now I do.
How to find out if your web audience is prepared for both experience? Is there any checklist or something like that?
Good question. I think it really depends on your product way more than like on the specific problem that you are solving, way more than on the audience itself. Because the audience is kind of like, people can learn things. It's not difficult, especially when we are talking about like a chatbot. Like we message a lot. Like we message really a lot, and this is probably like one of the most cross-generational things that we are doing, and we talk a lot as well. And so I think that it's really like it really depends on your product and the problem that you are solving with the bot and how easy it is to basically solve that problem by using a bot rather than on your audience specifically.
Let's move on. What's your opinion on that? People don't trust chatbots and they like to talk to real people more. This would imply that point of sales shops will always be more frequent channels of purchase than e-shops.
It's an interesting question. Back at Intercom, our mission is to kind of make internet business personal, and the whole idea is to take this metaphor for when you come to the shop and you have this person who knows you and who smiles to you and welcomes you, and a lot of stuff that we built, when we are thinking about some new interaction, we're actually trying to think, oh, actually, how does it work in real life? How does the interaction work in real life? And that helps because then we're able to design the experience that is way more personal but is still bound to internet businesses rather than brick and mortar stores. And I think that with when we are able to do that with people, I think eventually we will be able to do things like that with bots as well. We would be able to provide really personal experience and really welcoming and really genuine connection with a bot. But I think it's still rather far away, to tell the truth. But I would not really be too concerned about not trusting bots, because a lot of things that we're not feel uncomfortable about, for example, take this whole selfie thing. Think about 10 years ago, it was really weird, and it was weird to take a selfie, and then especially a selfie where you did not look best, no makeup, nothing, and then things like Snapchat appeared, and things like Snapchat, just by designing the product really in an opinionated way, they actually changed the user behavior, and now we feel oh, it's fine to send an ugly picture of myself to my friends, but then it actually goes way further, and you're actually starting to feel it's fine to send an ugly picture to whomever. You can just do it. You don't care about it. It's just transactional. So it's I think it's I think it basically will change.
And let's have the last question. Ever used chatbots in e-commerce environments to choose the right product in complex service offers?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think well, there are so many this beautiful dribble prototypes that have this perfect flow with this really awesome transitions and awesome choices. But the problem is that when you are trying to handle the complex interaction, there are just really many ways it can break. So I would actually for complex things and complex, especially in e-commerce, I would actually, at least for now, opt in for using a web view rather than using a chatbot, just because it will be faster and easier, and it will actually you will this example from Jared's pool with this 300 million button. I think that people right now might be actually losing money by using a chatbot rather than a web view, just because of the simplicity of it.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.